What's up, nerds, and welcome to another episode of Chad's AV Workshop. In today's episode, I want to talk about lens focal length and how we choose the right lens for the project that we're working on. Now, I think the most instinctive thing that people think about when they're thinking about focal length is, I want a wide lens to cover really wide things like a crowd or maybe like a big room for real estate. And I want a telephoto lens to capture things that are really far away, like wildlife or the moon or something. And in a lot of ways that is true, but it really doesn't talk about the different textures and the different push and pull factor that each lens has. Now, the best way to kind of wrap your head around this is that if we think about a 35 to 50 millimeter lens, these lenses are going to be the most natural. They're the most close to the human eye. So what we see is, in between 35 and 50 millimeters. And I'm sure some nerd is going to come out and say like exactly what the focal length is, but that doesn't really matter. The point is, what happens when we're on either side of those focal lengths? So when we use a 14 millimeter lens, what is the factor that's going to change the way our image looks compared to an 85 millimeter lens or anything that's above 50? And to further explain that, I'm going to switch lenses and show you exactly what's happening. And I'm also going to turn on some really cool Christmas lights behind me to give you an idea of how these lenses shape light. So let's take a look at the 14 millimeter. Okay, so right out of the gate, we can see that the 14 millimeter is doing the thing that we said it would do in the first place. It's giving us a lot more room. So if there was a huge crowd here, I would fit everybody in, and, I can fit in my whole AV workshop, which is, of course, you're saying just my basement. But we're also changing the background dramatically. Have a look at these lights and have a look at how far back the background is and how sharp the background is. And another thing I want you to look at is have a look at my face, this beautiful face here. Look at how my nose kind of gets pulled really weird on this lens, or how my face kind of looks a little bit wider on this 14 millimeter lens. Are these things something that I want in my image or something that I don't want in my image? And obviously I'm gonna spoil the end of this video and say it doesn't really matter. There's no set rules. It's just kind of what you want in your picture. But what I want to stress to you is that if you don't know the differences, you're not going to know which lens to choose, and you're only going to choose lenses based on the space. But if you have control over your space, you can choose this push and pull factor. You can choose how different you want your background to be, and that's going to give you a lot more creativity when it comes to shaping and making your projects. Let's take a look at an 85 millimeter and show some of the differences there. All right, just like we kind of said at the beginning, we're definitely a lot closer to my face. There is always going to be this, element of distance that comes to mind when we're thinking about different focal length lenses. But another thing I really want to show you is look at like the bokeh that comes in these lights behind me, and look at how much closer the background is, and look at how much blurred the background is, and check out my face. It doesn't pull the way that it did before. These are all completely different textures that come with this 85 millimeter lens. These are different textures that happen when you get above that human eye of 50, 35 millimeters. And when we have control over our space, we can start to think about, do I want my subject to stand out from the background like this? Do I want to have these romantic lights behind my subject? Maybe it's like a big kiss scene in my movie and I want there to be twinkle lights behind them. Or maybe it's like an action scene and I don't want that, and I want to show like cars in the background, and now I'm not getting that background look that I wanted before. Or maybe it's like a really wicked landscape. And the most important thing to remember is that if you didn't know this stuff, if you didn't know that the lens did more than just bring you closer to your subject, then you wouldn't be able to make these creative choices. The last thing I want to say is that I feel like each lens has a sweet spot, or at least for me, different lenses have really sweet spots, and that's what's going to make me pick up one lens versus another. For me, if I were to film with a 24, which I do all the time, I love my 24, probably my favorite, but that's neither here nor there. If I'm filming with a 24, I really want my subject to be pretty close to the lens, and I want my background to be really far away. And if I'm shooting with a 200 millimeter, I really want a huge space, and I want my subject to be in the middle of that space. And for me, that's what's gonna make that pop happen. Now, that won't always be the case for you. You're definitely gonna find your own sweet spots and your own lenses. And of course, every lens is even different. Even when we're in the same millimeter, there's so many arguments over which lens is sharper and better and has, less defaults, but that's a totally different video. The point is, don't just think about your lenses based on the distance. Think about your lenses based on how they're gonna shape your overall image, what texture they're gonna create, and how they're gonna make your subject look. If you were to shoot your subject with a really wide lens and you pulled their face and it was a portrait, they might be pretty unhappy with you. They're gonna say like, man, I've never looked uglier in a photo. And at the same time, if you wanted something to look really wacky and big and wide and you used a telephoto and you pulled it in really close, then you might be in some hot water. Or like if it was a chase scene and you wanted to see the background and you blurred it all out, then you're gonna be in some hot water. Of course, there is aperture that comes into play with your background, but this pulling and pushing factor is definitely real, and it's definitely something that you need to consider when you're picking your lenses. And that's pretty much all I have to say about that. I mean, I think lenses are really, really cool. They're really, really fun to play with, and it's always a good idea to experiment. So if you're on set, try something different, try something new, and you'll be really, really surprised with the outcome. And I feel like when you do these experiments, your quality of work and your style is going to come into its own, and it's just going to make you a better photographer and filmmaker. So let me know what your favorite lens is, what's your favorite focal length, and how you like to shoot in the comments below. And let me know if this video was helpful and if it told you something that you didn't already know. I'll see you next time.